Hi everyone, it's Agnieszka from 5 Minute Language. Welcome to my channel. Make sure you subscribe if you haven't already and give this video a thumbs up. I really appreciate it. So today's video is about the hardest languages to learn. I've already made a video about the easiest languages to learn, so make sure you check it out. I'm going to link it in the description box. But today's video is about the opposite topic, so the hardest, most difficult foreign languages to learn. Also, if you found me on TikTok, make sure you let me know in the comments below. So let's get started. So the first thing I'm going to say is obviously that it all depends. It depends on your native language, it depends on the other languages that you speak, it depends on whether you have tried learning foreign languages before or not. So everything is relative. For example, if you're a French speaker, you will find Spanish easy to learn. But if you're a Polish speaker, you will find Spanish quite challenging to learn. If you're an English speaker, then there are certain languages that are similar to English and the vocabulary is similar, so you will find them easier to learn. So obviously, take this video with a pinch of salt. It is all relative, it all depends. So we're going to start with the obvious. Mandarin Chinese is considered by most people one of the most difficult languages to learn. Obviously, the first thing you're going to think about when you think about Mandarin Chinese are the characters. So when you look at the number of characters, the complexity, it does look quite overwhelming, and it's also very time consuming to learn those characters as opposed to, for example, learning French vocabulary when you're a Spanish speaker. So this is going to take you a significant amount of time. Another difficulty with Mandarin Chinese is the tones. So there are different sounds that sound pretty much the same to an untrained ear, but actually there's a slight difference. If you think about music, for example, if you sing a tune and it's slightly out of tune, the person who's listening to you might not be able to guess what song it is because the tones are not quite right. And it's the same with tonal languages. If you get the tone right, you might get the meaning wrong, and the whole thing might be completely incomprehensible. Another thing about Mandarin Chinese are the homophones, so words or sounds that sound exactly the same but they have a different meaning. So there's a number of them. Obviously, every language has them, but Mandarin Chinese has a lot of them. The good thing about Mandarin Chinese is the number of native speakers that you can practice with. So that's another consideration. When you think about whether a language is hard or easy, think about the number of opportunities that you will have to practice the language, either with native speakers or with other people who are learning that language. So when you're learning French, for example, there's lots of native speakers. When you're learning Mandarin Chinese, there's lots of native speakers. If you're learning Korean, there's not as many. Okay, the next one is probably quite an obvious one as well. It's Arabic. And the difficulty about Arabic, apart from the writing system, obviously, which is very different to the kind of the writing system you're using in English, for example, is that there are many different variants of the language. So I attempted learning Arabic a few years ago, and one of the first challenges that was actually quite difficult to overcome was the number of dialects, different variations, and choosing what you actually want to learn. Because if you're just interested in the language, for example, rather than being interested in a specific country that speaks that language, it's difficult to choose because you need to kind of tie yourself to that one country or that one region whose Arabic you're going to speak. So that could be a challenge that you're facing. Another difficult thing about Arabic that makes it one of the hardest languages to learn are the kind of back of throat sounds that are difficult to make for somebody who only speaks English, for example. In English, there's not really those sounds, so your throat is not really trained to make them. So that's kind of, you know, you do need to practice that quite a bit to get it right. But again, the good thing about learning Arabic is that it is relatively easy to find native speakers to practice with because so many people in the world speak the language and it's different variants. Okay, the next one, a lot of people will argue that Japanese is a difficult language, that it's one of the most difficult languages to learn. I personally disagree with that. I think Japanese can be quite overwhelming at the start when you first look at it. Obviously, there are lots of different characters, but the good thing about Japanese is you can start with the phonetic alphabet. So you can write everything phonetically whilst you're learning, and you can build up your kanji vocabulary, which are the kind of more complex characters, so to speak, as you go along. So it is a difficult language because of all the different levels of formality as well that you have to consider that you don't have to consider in other languages. It does have a lot of kanji characters, so it's very time consuming to learn. And it does have a very different way of structuring language. So if you think about subject, verb, object in many European languages, for example, that goes out the window. Japanese has a very different way of structuring things. Okay, the next one is Korean. You guessed it right. Korean is considered one of the most difficult languages to learn. Like Japanese, it does have a lot of levels of formality that you have to choose from depending on who it is that you're speaking to. So if you're just used to speaking English or French or Spanish, that doesn't really exist to the same extent as it does in Korean. The other thing about Korean that makes it difficult to learn is that it is an isolated language that you can't really compare to anything. So if you're learning Polish, for example, you can easily compare it to Russian, or you can compare Spanish to French and so on. But with Korean, it's difficult to compare it to anything else. So that makes it more difficult to learn. And finally, I'm going to say any language with cases, with grammatical cases. So for example, Polish is a prime example. It's got 7 different cases. You need to conjugate things, you need to conjugate verbs and nouns and adjectives, change their forms depending on what you're saying, which is really challenging. I would also count German in this category, or any Germanic language which has cases. I personally struggle with that quite a bit. I find it a lot easier to learn languages that don't have cases, but for many people that's not a problem. Obviously, many people speak German. Okay, so this is it. Mandarin Chinese, Japanese, Arabic, Korean, and any language with cases. I hope you enjoyed this little video. Let me know in the comments below what language you're learning, and make sure you follow me on TikTok as well. And I'll see you next time. Bye.